All right, so as people start filing in, I'll just introduce myself. So my name is Becca, and I'm a bookseller at Belmont Books. And for those of you who are not familiar with us, Belmont Books is an independent and locally owned bookstore in Belmont, Massachusetts. So you can pretty much find us right outside of Cambridge, Mass. So before we begin, I'd just like to let everybody know of a number of other virtual events that will be coming up in October. So first we have Brant Cooper, who's the author of Disruption Proof, and he'll be in conversation with Robert Baduri on October 20th. And then we also have Judy Bolton Faisman, author of Asylum, and she'll be in conversation with Jessica Keener on October 21st. So you can register for any of these events, as well as any other events we have going on this month or next month on our website, which is belmontbooks.com. And that is also where you can purchase tonight's book, Red Deception. So I'll send a link out to that shortly. So if anybody has any questions during the event, you can feel free to message me in the chat. But if you have any questions for the authors, we asked you to put them in the Q&A section on Zoom. So that should be at the bottom of your screen. And we'll hope to get to as many for questions as we can towards the end of the event. We're so excited to welcome Ed Fuller, Gary Grossman, and Stan Deutsch. I'm going to tell you just a little bit about them, and then I will turn the event over to them. So starting off, we have Ed Fuller, who is the co-author of the new thriller, Red Deception. He is a hospitality industry leader, educator, and best-selling author. He is president of Irvine, California-based Laguna Strategic Advisors, a global consortium that provides business consulting services to corporations and governments. Fuller is also director of the FBI National Academy Associates. The plots for Red Hotel and Red Deception draw heavily on his experience and exploits. So next we have Gary Grossman, who is also the co-author of Red Deception. So his first novel, Executive Actions, propelled him into the world of geopolitical thrillers. Executive Treason, Executive Command, and Executive Force further tapped Grossman's experience as a journalist, newspaper columnist, documentary television producer, reporter, and media historian. Red Hotel and Red Deception, his collaborations with Ed Fuller, allowed Grossman to enter a new realm of globe-hopping thriller writing. And lastly, we have Stan Deutsch, who is our other featured author this evening. And Deutsch has been in professional media for more than 50 years. He has been a morning radio personality and news reporter, an operation and sales manager and equity partner at radio stations on both coasts. He has also taught and published a weekly entertainment magazine, as well as operating a successful retail business. He currently lives in Sacramento, California, and is now fully retired, but he keeps busy with his grandchildren, pickleball, and working as treasurer of his HOA board of directors. So we are so excited to have you all here with us this evening. And without further ado, I'll turn the event over to you, and just keep a lookout for the link to purchase the book in the chat. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Becca. That was a wonderful introduction, and welcome to our little call here this evening. Yes, my name is Stan, and we are going to introduce you to the Red Hotel series of thrillers. Last year's Red Hotel, this year it's Red Deception, and next year, watch out for Red Chaos coming your way. All of them, as Becca mentioned, available at belmontbooks.com, and more about that. You've been introduced a little bit to Gary Grossman. I've known Gary since we both attended Emerson College in Boston back as the first graduating class in 1880. I think we look pretty good. What do you think? By the way, go Sox, go Sox. Great game last night. I have not had the pleasure of meeting Ed Fuller before this year, but full disclosure, I have stayed at several Marriott hotels over the years, so I consider him a brother. And if you have any questions for our co-authors, please place them in the chat room, or we'll just take them later after our little discussion is over, and we'll relay them to Gary and Ed. As Becca mentioned, Gary's career is an Emmy award-winning television producer and journalist. He's produced for NBC News and ABC and CBS and NBC and Fox and PBS and dozens of cable networks over the years. And of course, the author of some great thrillers, Executive Action, Executive Treason, and Executive Command, and one of my favorites, Old Earth. Look for those here also at Belmont Books. Ed Fuller, former U.S. Army captain, spent a total of 40 years with the Marriott International Corporation, including 22 as president. and managing director of the group's international lodging division. He helped create Marriott's global security strategy, and he enables company-wide safety and defense policies amid the world of growing threat of terrorism. In 2010, Ed wrote the best-selling business book. You can look for it. There it is. Gary's holding it up. You Can't Lead with Your Feet Up There on the Desk. So Ed is the real deal. He knows what he's talking about. Gentlemen, a big welcome to you both and to our audience. Thrill-packed trailer has been produced for Red Deception. Gary has the controls and he will introduce that trailer to us. Take it, Gary.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Stan. Thanks for the great introduction. Marketing and getting books across to everybody today takes the same kind of effort that it does for a movie and a TV show. We have a trailer for Red Hotel, but we're going to show you the trailer for Red Deception, which is our newest book. And you should be seeing the screen now. So here it goes.
What the hell happened, Riley?
Elizabeth, I was on the bridge when the truck exploded. This is right out of the report that I drafted for you. And then the attack in DC? Someone in your office leaked this. It came from inside. The terrorists followed it chapter and verse. I'm sorry, but there's going to be more.
Riley?
The question is not who. The question is why. And the answer to that, they want to keep our eyes off the prize.
Wow, that's a heart stopper. All right. Can we pull that back? Are we back to us? Yes, there we go.
All right. Did it play okay for everyone?
Yeah, that was wonderful. Thank you, Gary. And that is a heart stopper for sure. So before we get into the action that people will read in Red Deception, let's talk a little bit about the two of you guys, Ed Fuller and Gary Grossman. You put this writing collaboration together for the Red Hotel series. How did you guys meet? You came from two different worlds.
I think Gary can tell the beginning of that story better than I, because it starts with the walking of the dogs.
Absolutely.
I just had to get my dog out of the room here. So,
well, one evening in Los Angeles, I used to live in Boston. Ed used to live in Boston, same as Stan, but this is LA. Walking our dog one night, bumped into a neighbor, lived a few blocks away. His name is Bruce Fierstein. We chatted for a little bit, but he said, Gary, I'm so glad I got to see you tonight because there's somebody that I'd like you to meet. You write political thrillers. I have a friend who's on a Boston University board with me, and he's interested in having a collaborator work with him. And I thought, well, I haven't written with a collaborator before. I have worked with collaborators on television, but not in a book, but I'd be interested in meeting with him. And he said, well, he's the former president of Marriott International. I thought, well, what would I have in common with the former president of Marriott International. I run TV shows, but hotels. And he said, you have to meet with him. You have to. And you know me, and I'm putting you together based on my background and your background and Ed's. Well, he was speaking from experience because Bruce Fierstein wrote the first 3 Pierce Brosnan James Bond movies. So, all right, Bruce, let's meet Ed. It maybe took me less than 30 seconds when I met Ed to realize that he was as much in the anti-terrorism business as the hotel business. Hotels, Marriott, Ritz hotels, targeted and bombed in Jakarta, getting staff and guests out of Cairo at the fall of Mubarak, when Gaddafi fell in Tripoli, dealing with cartels and triads, and people of all shapes and sizes and terrorism backgrounds around the world. I reached across the table, said, I believe we can work together, shook his hand and asked him who he had on speed dial. And I'm still waiting to find out. I'm still waiting to find out.
It's a great story. Obviously, Gary and I know each other, and I've heard that story before. And it's so unusual to find 2 people walking their dog. You know, in LA, most of the dogs have their own cars, but an easier story to believe in New England, probably. So the action in Red Deception takes us from Washington, D.C. to Moscow, to Las Vegas, to London, to New York and Chicago and Brussels and the Ukraine. And so familiarity with all of those locations is necessary in order to write about them. Ed has that familiarity because he's literally worked in all of those locations and had to deal with the issues like Gary just mentioned that are in Red Deceptions. And a lot of these are right out of the headlines of today. Afghanistan, the big troop and civilian evacuations that we just watched happen recently. And the truck suicide bombing that happens in Washington, D.C. in Red Deception, and the Ukraine hotel evacuations. So all of this came about because Ed has truly experienced these firsthand. Ed, tell us a little bit about not all of those experiences, but some of the reasons that this bubbled up into these incredible thrillers.
Number one, Stan, I was counting the number of flights there to make sure my points got registered. So thank you for doing that. That helped a lot. Well, I have traveled a lot. A former book says I've traveled 10 million miles. Actually, it's 14 million. And that came part of the job. In fact, people would say, where do you live? And I'd say seat 2B. And so that was it, without getting Shakespeare in the middle of this. We had many, many experiences at the time we opened our operation. Within the first 2 weeks, we had a kidnapping in Mexico. And shortly after that, we had a situation in Panama, which is a good short story because some of my stories get so long, I've got to make sure I'm cutting them shorter. This was Panama in the era of Noriega. And if you remember, Panama Canal was ours. Yep. It isn't today, but it was then. And at that point, Noriega was taking it back. We put troops into Panama, but we had civilians in the one hotel. And we had to take care of the guests as well as our Panamanian associates. So at that point, our GM happened to be having elective surgery in the United States, and all of a sudden, all hell broke loose. Noriega ordered his troops to visit all of the hotels and to enter the hotels and capture and bring back anybody that was there. We had 67 customers that were in the hotel. Some were reporters. I know that makes Gary a little nervous from time to time. Some were producers, but most of them were guest family related situations, because most people don't realize there was huge population of retired people in Panama. So what did our team do? They put the guests in the laundry, in the various pieces of equipment, dryers, washers, and an extrusion device that we do our sheets with, and closed them in, dumped in a little more dirty laundry to make sure they couldn't be seen. And then the troops arrived. I got there a couple days later, and I can tell you every door had bullets through it. They had just gone through the hotel and machine gunned the doors, hoping that they'd get anybody in the rooms. A couple were broken open on every floor. When they went downstairs, they couldn't see anybody. Staff was there, they were just doing their jobs. And so they were satisfied and left. Ultimately, through a whole nother couple of stories, we got those folks out and back to the United States or whatever country they were from. We took care of our associates, made sure they were all okay. As it was a relatively short war, that's as short as I get on my story.
Well, I tell you, I mean, my heart's pounding just listening to you tell that story. Now you take that story and you give it to Gary Grossman, who has the ability to truly make your heart stop while you're listening or reading this this story. The particular episode in Red Deception takes place in Ukraine, involves getting people out of a hotel. I don't want to tell you anymore, but it is an incredible scene, just an amazing scene. Something else that comes up for me and Gary and I've talked about it, and you know this, when you're staying in a hotel, let's say in a country that is not too friendly with the United States, you are being watched, aren't you? It's pretty clear that you will not have your privacy.
Well, by the way, I do want to clarify one thing, Stan. I gave that Panama story to Gary, and he hadn't used it yet. You're going to have to pick the next book.
It's in the next, but it's in 2 books forward. It's
Oh my!
The book that you read, or the situation in Red Deception, was actually in former Soviet Georgia.
Okay.
So
very close, very close.
You're very neighbors, maybe, but by oceans. But to your question, the situations that we face day to day in these environments always had different angles to them, always had different approaches. And in the case of some of my more challenging areas, we had people that were kidnapped, people that were injured in bombings. We had people killed in bombings, regretfully. And we dealt with each of those individually to support our guests and our associates. We did not forget our associates. And though I'm backtracking a little on Panama, the relationship with our associates was critical. And that was something that made the difference in Panama. Now,
you know, yeah, that's okay. I was thinking there's something for everyone in Red Deception. Even, you wouldn't expect this in a thriller, but there's something for fans of origami. And that blew me away. So Gary, tell us a little bit about origami and Red Deception.
Well, I think the incredible thing about thrillers that are based on somebody's real life experience, Ed Fuller, who you said in the introduction is the real deal. Absolutely. It makes me kind of think about what else and where else we can go with stories that are maybe just beyond what our realm of experience is, but is highly possible. MIT, right in Cambridge, and other institutions have developed a thing called an origami robot. You can use the Google machine, type in origami robot, and you will see this incredible small device. I mean, maybe about this size, the size of a thumb drive, maybe, that would unfold, turn into a robot, and can move. And I discovered that and thought, well, that would be an interesting way to, we talk about with Russians with umbrella and tapping somebody with an umbrella and poisoning them. What about a poison that could be delivered with an origami robot that unfolds and then can scoot around? And what if that origami robot is left in an office of, say, a world leader? And what if
let's not give away too much.
We're not going to give away too much. We're not going to give away too much. And what if that origami robot does its job?
Yeah.
How is it even discovered when the origami robot in water will dissolve and it will disappear? So we created a scene that really is pretty pivotal in Red Deception, that comes from a science that and an invention that I had not known, Ed and I had not known prior to going into research. And every day when we're writing, every single day, the internet's open and we're researching something, or Ed says, oh, let me check that, let's run that by the FBI. Or he says, I'd like to check with somebody else who's on speed dial, who that I'm still waiting to find out who they are. And we check those things out, and we think the unthinkable. And God, Red Deception starts with the unthinkable, bombing of the 14th Street Bridge in Washington, D.C., which is very possible, and other unthinkable events. And those unthinkable events, like 9/11, were thought of and considered possible by authors and movie screenwriters and movie directors. So who were some of the people who were brought to Washington after 9/11 to advise the Pentagon and the CIA and the White House? They are people who do what we do. Yeah. And that's where even the origami robot comes in. And yeah, there are things we should pay attention to.
I am amazed, Gary, having read all of your books since going back to the Executive series and Old Earth, and now the Red Deception series, how many of the things that you write about as unthinkable have become very real over the past decade or so. And so I advise you, when you read, you out there folks, when you read Red Deception and the Red Hotel series in general, make notes, because sadly, a lot of this stuff will be in the headlines. And that's something that is a phenomenon that Gary has been able to accomplish in his writing. Ed, the hero of the Red Hotel series, and we met him in the trailer, is Dan Riley. And Dan Riley in the book is the president of International Kensington Royal Hotel Corporation. And that, of course, is based on you, correct? And so I guess the question I have for you, Ed, as you are here now, sitting there in a nice, comfortable room with library behind you, do you see yourself as a hero? Are you a heroic person, having done what you've done for all those decades?
No, I think because of my love of the people I worked with, the things we did, they were all in all situations that we had to take risks on, and it was not heroic, it was the right thing to do. Now, it's interesting. Vietnam was a little different. We've got Dan in Afghanistan, but the fact is that you a minute ago were trying to lead me into a discussion of certain programs that go on in the world today.
Yes.
And I avoided it by going to the Panama story.
I noticed.
Because I was so intent to get Gary on that I just distracted from your question. So number one, apology. I do apologize. But where you were taking me was something that's interesting, but surely not necessarily heroic. The largest example of this is coming up in Red Chaos.
Next year's book.
A complete different approach. What I'm sharing with you today is a part in Red Deception and a bit of Red Hotel. And that was that Gary asked me a lot of questions. Did I ever work with CIA officers? And I said yes. And he got a little more comfortable. And so at that point, he asked about the situation with sex overseas. Now, Gary never really raised that a lot during our discussions, but he has the talent to talk about it with words. The fact is that we dealt with a lot of that. And every day, it's important to note that you can be in a hotel and you are not alone. And there are at least 7 or 8 good stories. And I'd be glad to meet you in that bar we keep talking about. But the fact is that we have in many cities and countries. So one story, Kathleen Matthews, who is Chris Matthews' wife, worked for us as our PR lead and our head of communications. And one day, and Kathleen and I had great relationship because we always had a Starbucks once a week and talked politics from either end of the desk. And she came in and said, Ed, you just cannot do this. And I said, what? And she said, I've been told in the news media circles that the Chinese are installing listening equipment, both for conversations and for computers. This is totally not right. Long story short, the resolution had to go to Bill Marriott. And the answer was, when I told her we're in the process of helping them install it, she went, what are you doing? And I said, Kathleen, we would not have those hotels in 2 weeks if we did not follow the government directive. Now, what do you want me to do? Bill Marriott supported the position we had to do it, but we had a plan to notify everybody that checked in and everybody that was in a room to get a letter to say they're listening. So there was no confusion. We got not one complaint during the Olympics, which is when they were installing it. And that material equipment is in that hotel today, but it's turned off, has a cover over it, but it can be turned on anytime they want to get something. So other countries use that and sex to capture information, as well as an important form of blackmail if they can get the right material.
Which that's amazing, scary to think about that. But that leads me to the mysterious Marnie Babbitt. Now, Marnie Babbitt is a creation of Gary's imagination, or is she? She is Dan Riley's love interest. And so, Gary, did you interview Ed deep enough to be able to determine if there is a Marnie Babbitt?
I don't want to give too much away there, but Marnie Babbitt begins in Red Hotel,
yes,
the first book in the series. And Marnie is a really interesting character. She works for Barclays Bank in London, and they meet in a Middle Eastern country. And as Ed and I were developing Marnie and developing Red Hotel, we really didn't know what her story was. And that's not unusual. Sometimes it takes on a TV series the second season to figure out what somebody's story is, or the second book in a book series. Well, Marnie's story continues in Red Deception. And people came away from Red Hotel wondering, is she good or is she bad? And Ed and I came away wondering, is she good or is she bad? And all I'm going to say is, she's a really interesting character. And but there is, I will say, there is a Russian woman spy who has two names in the book. And she is trying to work everybody. And she is, that's not Marnie that I'm talking about. She's a colonel in the Russian army, and she uses what a former KGB general, Oleg Kosygin, says, in America, you ask your men to stand up for your country.
Gary freeze?
Did I freeze? Hello? Hello? I'm here?
I got you, Gary.
Okay. And all okay here? You can see me? I think Stan is frozen now. Well, and Oleg Kosygin said, in America, you ask your men to stand up for your country. And this is the former KGB general. But he said, in Russia, we asked our women to lie down for our country. So sexpionage is real, and sexpionage is something that Ed had to deal with in hotels, not just in China that he was talking about, but where? In Germany, East Germany, all
Middle
the
East,
Soviet bloc nations.
Cuba, Mexico. There's just a lot of stories. But Stan, I was asked about Marnie, like you said, and I said to him, I've never had a banker for a lover, but I have been screwed by the bank.
And there you go. So, Gary, we could probably do 2 hours here tonight, but your books, Gary, the Executive Action series and now the Red Hotel series, they are all written so well, and they play out in the reader's mind as if we are watching a movie. And I know that, of course, all your years of producing for television, there's a special writing technique for that. Obviously, not everybody can do that. How do you get into that? How do you, just give us a little bit about the process? Have you ever developed, what the typical writer's block is? Where do the ideas and the dialogue come from? Where do you take how do you take the stories that Ed tells you, which are fascinating and heartthrobbing and dangerous, but how do you create what we know as an amazing thriller novel, and with characters that stick with us, and it seems literally like we're watching a movie? Wow.
Well, thank you. All I can say is what I did before Ed makes me better. And we're editing the third book in the series right now, Red Chaos. And as Ed and I have collaborated, and there it is, right? He's
there it is.
Manuscript. Next summer, it'll be out. Ed said, I'm missing some of the magic that you do. I'm missing some of the intercutting, multiple things happening at the same time, which of course they do in the world. I'm missing the butterfly flapping its wings in China and having an effect in Washington, D.C. or Moscow. So whatever I have done, or whatever style I've done, and I won't say created, but kind of brought from movies or TV over to books and to thrillers, Ed's made me better on that. Now, the fact is, books have to be faster paced today than years ago. Ed and I share a love for a book called 7 Days in May. It was a great book in the 1960s. It's a fabulous movie, but the pace is very different than a thriller would be today. So multiple things happen around the world, and they all kind of add up. And with Ed Fuller's experience, and then driving through Dan Riley's character, Dan Riley is not James Bond, and he's not Jason Bourne. He is somebody who relies on other people, as Ed did with the CIA and the FBI and Interpol and Chinese intelligence, and all the other agencies that he's worked with, that I'm hoping to get hold of his phone one day and find out who they are. No, and he says no. But he's somebody who knows that he's not the man who walks in as James Bond would walk in and level, the playing field. If there's a gun to be used, Dan Riley's not carrying it. But there may be a gun around, but he's not the guy carrying the gun. He's the guy figuring things out. And he's the guy working with people. So if we come to a story based with that you've got to use ratiocination, you got to use what's up here. It's no superpower, it's thinking power. That's how we work together, and that's how we write. What did you do in this situation? Or what could Dan do in this situation? How would he find himself out of the situation? And who does he call? So where Red Hotel opens with a bombing in Tokyo, which is a stand-in for experience that Ed had that he could talk about in Jakarta. Red Deception begins in Washington with a memory of what he saw in Washington with a plane going down and a bridge being closed. Right. But then there's multiple other episodes around the world. And we haven't talked about the bad guy in these books. And that is a character named Nikolai Gorshkov. He's a stand-in for Putin. He is, for all intents and purposes, Vladimir Putin, whose desire is to rebuild the old Soviet bloc of nations and restore Russia to its former prominence or as a world power. So with that in the background, who can he employ? What can he do? What chaos can he create, or deceptions can he do? And all of that really then comes down to a hotel level, where Ed in real life set up a color code system of threats that would determine what the defense system would be at a hotel, which he certainly can talk about. And that is the red in the books. The red has to do not with Russia, although Russia's in it, but it's also threat levels and how we're protected, how we're better because of how we're safer because of what he's done.
Yeah, the whole idea of Red Hotel comes from your levels of danger, I guess, to your hotel, to your guests over the years. How did you, Ed, how did you come up with that? How did you determine how you would measure the threat level to your guests, to your hotel properties?
Well, the US government has a threat level system that they've had even before 9/11. And that system works, may work, could work better in the United States. But internationally, we had countries that didn't have systems, actually had really crazy systems, 5 plum blossoms. And, at the same time, we needed to have a standard, as ultimately we were in 73 countries. And ultimately, we were faced with challenges that weren't reported in the US papers at all. So we had to, number one, set up a system of monitors, 2 people, 2 shifts, 5, 6 people running it in Hong Kong and Washington, and determining if they see a problem through 3 different agencies. We were contacted, told something was amiss. We would raise the security level on that hotel. The positive stories that come out of that: Greece, Jordan, clearly, Colombia, and Sri Lanka didn't work, but we were early in the system. These areas, when they interviewed, the various people that they had caught. They said, we went to the Marriott, or in Mumbai, the Renaissance. We looked at the security. It was just too tight.
Wow. Yeah, so that's you fulfilled your goal, I guess, in that sense, if they backed away. We're almost out of time, but I wanted to we talked about how these books play out in the reader's mind as a movie. I guess the answer is we'd all love to see these up on the big screen, or and on a Netflix series, or something like that. But you've probably given this some thought. I'm sure Gary and maybe Ed as well. Who would play Dan Riley in the movie version? Now, Daniel Craig is available now because, you know, he did his last 007. But have you given any thought, just as a light sort of question to end on? Who would you cast?
Ed?
Yeah, oh, Gary, I want to pick Marnie. You pick me.
Well, I think we get Ed into makeup, and we're set. You know who I do like, and Ed and I haven't really talked about this. I do like the actor who played Daredevil on TV. His last name is Cox, British actor. He's really, really, really good. I'll have to send you some pictures, some video of him, Ed. And I thought he's great. But I don't know. We do have Bruce Fierstein, who is pitching. Again, he wrote the first 3 Pierce Brosnan James Bond movies. He's out pitching the series or the movie now.
Wonderful.
And we're very, very hopeful. You know, as William Goldman, the great Hollywood writer, said, the one true thing that we all know about Hollywood is that nobody knows anything. So we'd like to say, we're in a deal and it's gonna happen. We're hoping we'll be in a deal, and then we're hoping it will happen.
Stan, I've got to answer your question.
Sure.
And playing Marnie is my wife, Michaela. And I'm sticking to it.
Is she perhaps in the other room listening?
You never know. She sees these. I've got to play it clear.
As they say on,
Italian,
Family Feud.
But she's not a banker.
As they say on Family Feud, good answer, good answer.
And Charlie Cox was the fellow I was thinking of. But you know,
okay.
it all depends. And I just thought he was fantastic as Daredevil, and he played a blind character in the Marvel series. But you know, it's an interesting question that ultimately is a studio question, and who they want and who they have a deal with and who they think can launch it. We're just looking for kind of Alfred Hitchcock cameos that we can make. You know, we walk through the hotel, we're in it.
Right.
But and that always seems right. I want to stress again that these are thrillers. These are mysteries. They're globe-trotting books. I kind of we call political reality thrillers. They're political and they're real, or they're on the edge of being real, but they're based so much on Ed's experiences, but they're set in nonfiction. So there's a little comfort zone. But Ed has been through it. And I listen to Ed. He says, if you're traveling abroad, check with the State Department on what countries are safe to go to. But I even listen to him more on what floor I should stay on, which would be the top floor, Ed, with the greatest view.
If we ever get in an argument, but you want to stay on the 7th floor or below in most cities, unless you're in New York and the like, and then it's still not the top floor. But reason for that, I bet Stan even knows.
Yes, I believe that has to do with the height at which a fire engine can reach you if you happen to need to evacuate.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's something you don't even think about. Everybody assumes, oh, let's go to the top floor because you get the view and everything. But you're right. In an emergency. Well, I tell you, anybody watching this right now who has ever or has plans to stay in an international hotel in a friendly country or a not so friendly country, you will now know, if you read these books, you will now, not only is it a thrill ride, but you will know more about what happens behind the scenes. When you check in, you're interested in seeing your room. Is it clean? Is it, what's the view? Oh, it's terrific. And making sure you have room service. And are they going to change the linens? And can you get an extra towel for the pool and all of that? But behind the scenes, making sure, especially these days, making sure that you are safe from all kinds of potential issues out there was for all these years Ed Fuller's job, and a lot of what Ed Fuller designed for his work with the Marriott Corporation, the International Corporation, I'm sure Ed has spread throughout the resort and hotel industry over the years.
Absolutely.
So
And frankly, when you get down to it, our market research, their market research for years said the number one thing people wanted was a safe room.
Absolutely.
You didn't advertise it, but we knew it. And that was our biggest priority.
Absolutely. And you tend to let your guard down when you're, especially if it's not a business trip, if you're in a foreign country and you're there as a tourist, you tend to let your guard down. You're there on a vacation and you may not even recognize some potential threat. And that's why the folks who are in charge of security for your hotel are so important. Gary.
Yeah, in fact, you just reminded me, Ed, as you walked me around the areas that people normally don't see in a hotel, and we did this in one of the LA hotels, I was really struck. I certainly knew the expression, but in the elevators, in the hotel staff elevators, plastered, if you see something, say something.
Yeah.
And that's also in Red Hotel and Red Deception. You taught me about something as insignificant as batteries and what they mean.
They can be, well, there are two or three things. Number one, if you find batteries in the room, it's a little curious as to what they're being for. And in a second hotel that was blown up in the Ritz, they found a battery packet, and that was where the bomber had stayed the night before. Had the housekeeper seen that and said something, we might have had a different situation. And that's a clear example for Gary. But a hang up for me, if I've got a few seconds, is the plaque on the back of the door. I'm not going to put Gary on the spot, nor you, Stan, and ask how many times you've diligently gone over, studied the plaque, and understand where the exits are, understand where your room is.
I have done it more, Ed, since I read these books, since I've absolutely.
It's incredible the information that's there. And it's more important than the speech from the flight attendants on your flight, because you can save your life by crawling out. It's not a crash. And people just don't do it. And I've been through 2 fires, very fortunate. Marriott never lost a life in a hotel as a result of a regular fire. And I've been through them. We have a procedure. We start down the corridor, knocking on every door. We found a lot of different things, but the important thing, had they gone out and gone down the stairwell, they would not even have experienced the disruption on that floor while we put the fire out in the one room, and that person was safe. And that was a cigarette fire, which isn't available in
Oh,
US
wow.
hotels, but is available worldwide.
Well, Ed Fuller, an amazing life and amazing stories, and the stories have been worked into incredibly heart-thumping thrillers by Gary Grossman and Ed's partnership and collaboration. I'm going to send it back to Becca at Belmont Books. And remember, these are the Red Hotel series of thrillers. Last year, look for Red Hotel. It is Red Deception right now, and next year it'll be Red Chaos. And certainly thank you to all of you for watching and for listening. And back to you, Becca. Do we have any questions?
I'm not seeing any questions so far, but I just want to say a big thank you to all of you for being here. We're so honored. Belmont Books is so honored to have hosted this event. And just a reminder to use the link in the chat to purchase the book so you can support both these authors and Belmont Books. And unless you guys have any other final words to say, I think that's all from my end.
Go Sox.
Go Sox indeed. Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Thank you, Ed, Gary, Becca. Take care.
Thank you. Have a great night, everybody.
Thank you.